It was a war that began with the thunder of naval guns and ended before most people had finished their morning tea. A war so brief, so lopsided, that it still holds the record as the shortest war in history. Just 38 minutes. Yet behind this almost comical statistic lies a story of greed, imperial ambition, betrayal, and a desperate bid for power. On the morning of August 27, 1896, the small island Sultanate of Zanzibar stood against the mighty British Empire. At the heart of the conflict was a succession dispute. Who would sit on the throne of one of the most strategically valuable territories in East Africa? The outcome was inevitable, yet the audacity of defiance and the ruthless efficiency of Britain's response turned this into one of history's strangest episodes. This was not a battle of equals. One side had wooden dhows, outdated rifles, and palace guards. The other commanded modern warships, artillery, and a global empire at its back. But as you'll soon discover, the Anglo-Zanzibar War was not just a bizarre footnote in history. It was a window into the final days of empire building, when local rulers were forced to either bow to European dominance or be erased in under an hour. Today, when we think of wars, we imagine campaigns lasting years, even decades. But the Anglo-Zanzibar War challenges that notion. It was short, explosive, and decisive. Zanzibar itself was no ordinary island. Located just off the coast of present-day Tanzania, it was a jewel of the Indian Ocean, the world's leading exporter of cloves, a hub of ivory trade, and, until recently, a key player in the East African slave market. Whoever controlled Zanzibar controlled trade routes stretching from Africa to India and Arabia. In the 19th century, that power belonged to the sultans of Zanzibar. But Britain, determined to dominate East Africa, had been tightening its grip over the island. When the sultan suddenly died in 1896 and a defiant cousin seized the throne without British approval, the stage was set for a showdown that would be as brief as it was brutal. To understand the war, we must first understand Zanzibar itself. By the mid-19th century, this small island off Africa's Swahili coast had become one of the most important trading centers in the world. Its wealth rested on two controversial pillars: spices and slaves. Clove plantations made Zanzibar enormously rich. Ships carried the spice across the world, giving the island the nickname the Spice Island. But the labor that fueled this prosperity came largely from enslaved Africans, transported across the Indian Ocean in vast numbers. Zanzibar was one of the last strongholds of the East African slave trade, despite mounting international pressure to abolish it. European powers, particularly Britain, eyed Zanzibar with keen interest. For Britain, controlling the island meant securing a strategic outpost in its broader imperial competition with Germany in East Africa. By the 1880s, Britain and Germany had divided much of the mainland into colonial spheres of influence. Zanzibar, sitting just offshore, became the crown jewel Britain wanted to dominate. By 1890, Zanzibar was officially declared a British protectorate. This did not mean direct colonization, but rather that Britain had the final say in matters of foreign policy and, crucially, succession. The Sultan remained a figurehead, but London, through its local consuls, effectively pulled the strings. However, Britain's influence was not uncontested. Germany, building its own colonial empire in what is now Tanzania, kept a watchful eye on Zanzibar. The Germans had their own agents on the island, ready to exploit any political instability. This simmering rivalry meant that the choice of who became sultan was more than a local issue. It was a matter of imperial geopolitics. Enter the central figures of our story. Sultan Hamad bin Thawani, who reigned from 1893 to 1896, was considered friendly to British interests. But in August 1896, he suddenly died, likely from poisoning. His cousin, Khalid bin Barghash, wasted no time. Within hours, He marched into the palace and declared himself Sultan, without British approval. For the British, this was unacceptable. Khalid was seen as hostile to their influence and possibly aligned with Germany. Allowing him to remain on the throne would undermine everything Britain had built in Zanzibar. The stage was set for confrontation. On August 25, 1896, Sultan Hamad died unexpectedly. The cause was never proven, but many suspected foul play. The timing was too convenient, and whispers of poisoning circulated. His cousin, Khalid bin Barghash, seized the opportunity. Supported by sections of the palace guard and wealthy Zanzibari elites, Khalid rushed into the royal palace. Defying protocol, Khalid declared himself Sultan without waiting for British approval. He raised the Sultan's flag over the palace, and his supporters began fortifying the complex. By nightfall, he had over 3,000 armed men, palace guards, askaris, local soldiers, and loyal civilians gathered in defense. But Khalid's defiance had immediate consequences. The British consul, Basil Cave, informed him that his claim was illegitimate. Britain recognized only candidates acceptable to them, and Khalid was not one of them. Cave issued a blunt ultimatum: step down or face war. Khalid, however, believed he could call Britain's bluff. After all, the palace was strong, his men were loyal, and Germany might intervene on his behalf. Besides, in his eyes, the throne was rightfully his. He ignored Britain's warning and braced for a fight. Britain wasted no time. Admiral Harry Rawson, commander of the Royal Navy Squadron in East Africa, was ordered to prepare for action. By August 26th, 3 modern British warships, HMS St. George, HMS Philomel, and HMS Raccoon, positioned themselves in Zanzibar's harbor. A 4th, HMS Thrush, soon joined. Together, they carried heavy naval guns capable of reducing the palace to rubble. On shore, British Marines and sailors set up machine guns facing the palace. In total, Britain had around 900 men, backed by warships armed with dozens of heavy guns. The contrast with Khalid's forces could not have been starker. His 3,000 defenders were mostly palace guards, armed with outdated rifles and a few small cannons. He also had a royal yacht, the Glasgow, anchored in the harbor, fitted with light artillery. But against modern British warships, it was hardly a threat. As the sun rose on August 27th, tension reached its peak. Basil Cave delivered a final ultimatum. If Khalid did not step down and leave the palace by 9 a.m., Britain would open fire. Khalid refused. He barricaded himself inside the palace, declaring he would rather die than surrender his claim to the throne. His men fortified windows, loaded cannons, and aimed rifles at the harbor. Crowds of civilians gathered, watching nervously as the minutes ticked down. Britain wasted no time. Admiral Harry Rawson, commander of the Royal Navy Squadron in East Africa, was ordered to prepare for action. By August 26th, 3 modern British warships, HMS St. George, HMS Philomel, and HMS Raccoon, positioned themselves in Zanzibar's harbor. A 4th, HMS Thrush, soon joined. Together, they carried heavy naval guns capable of reducing the palace to rubble. On shore, British Marines and sailors set up machine guns facing the palace. In total, Britain had around 900 men, backed by warships armed with dozens of heavy guns. The contrast with Khalid's forces could not have been starker. His 3,000 defenders were mostly palace guards, armed with outdated rifles and a few small cannons. He also had a royal yacht, the Glasgow, anchored in the harbor, fitted with light artillery. But against modern British warships, it was hardly a threat. As the sun rose on August 27th, tension reached its peak. Basil Cave delivered a final ultimatum. If Khalid did not step down and leave the palace by 9 a.m., Britain would open fire. Khalid refused. He barricaded himself inside the palace, declaring he would rather die than surrender his claim to the throne. His men fortified windows, loaded cannons, and aimed rifles at the harbor. Crowds of civilians gathered, watching nervously as the minutes ticked down. In the immediate aftermath, Britain installed Sultan Hamad bin Muhammad, a more compliant ruler, on the throne. Hamad quickly signed treaties solidifying British dominance over Zanzibar. The human cost, however, was staggering for such a brief conflict. Over 500 Zanzibaris were killed or wounded, most of them palace guards and civilians caught in the crossfire. On the British side, only one sailor was injured. The imbalance highlighted the sheer scale of Britain's military superiority at the height of empire. Khalid's escape to the German consulate embarrassed the British but did not change the outcome. Germany eventually smuggled him out of Zanzibar, and he lived in exile for many years. Britain, meanwhile, tightened its grip on the island, ensuring no further defiance. The Anglo-Zanzibar War became infamous for its brevity. But beyond the record books, it symbolized something larger: the overwhelming dominance of European empires at the end of the 19th century. Local rulers, no matter how defiant, simply could not stand against modern firepower and imperial politics. Zanzibar itself remained a British protectorate until 1963, when it finally gained independence. Yet the echoes of that brief, violent morning in 1896 linger as a reminder of how swiftly lives, thrones, and even nations could be decided under colonial rule. And so, the shortest war in history lasted just 38 minutes. A war born of ambition and defiance, ended by cannons and empire. It is tempting to laugh at the absurdity of a war that lasted less than an hour. But for the hundreds who died, and for the Sultan who lost his throne, it was anything but a joke. It was proof that, in the age of empire, resistance, however brave, could be crushed in the time it takes to drink a cup of tea. History is full of stories like this: strange, tragic, and almost unbelievable. If you enjoyed this dive into the forgotten war of Zanzibar, make sure to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and hit the bell icon so you never miss another tale from history's darker, stranger corners.